And I feel a theme running through your story of, you use the word the underside, right?
Mm-hmm.
That seeing the underside and seeing God at the same time. And that,
Right.
that and is really important. It's not a but,
Right.
it's an and.
Correct. No, I think that's right. And I think one of the reasons grace ends up being such an important concept to me is that I've experienced it on like such a visceral level, and that it's something that has completely reoriented my life in a really disruptive way, not in a nice, fluffy Bob Ross cloud kind of way, like in the way that that kind of knocks you on your backside. And so that ends up being sort of the story I want to tell over and over, because it's just the most true thing I've ever experienced. So.
You also really emphasize the Christian themes of death and resurrection. And I'd like you to talk about really what those words mean for you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Christian life is a life of continual death and resurrection. Whereas I think some sectors of Christianity think, well, you're saved and then you're good, right? And then you just lead a really nice life and you're a good person and you're redeemed and you've sort of climbed this spiritual ladder so that you're close to God. And that's just not been my experience. My experience is of that disruption over and over again, of going along and tripping upon something that I think I know or that I think I'm certain about and realizing I'm wrong, or maybe fighting to think I'm right about something over and over and over again until I experience what I call the sort of divine heart transplant. You know, it's like God reaches in, and the prophets speak of this, and it's not a polite experience.
Well, give me an example. Can you think of?
Oh gosh. Okay, so when my church was mostly young adults, and it was sort of hip urban young adults, and then I preached at Red Rocks. Easter sunrise service. It's 10,000 people, and the Denver Post ran a front page, full page picture and story about me on preaching at Easter and about my church and whatnot. And we only had about 40, 45 people every week at this point. And the next week, we doubled in size, like overnight, and then we kind of tripled in size. And we were excited because we were really struggling to grow. But what happened was it was like the wrong kind of people. I mean, it was the wrong kind of different for us, right? So, like, some churches might freak out if the drag queens show up, but these were like bankers wearing Dockers, right? And we were like, it wasn't like, I freaked out. This actually isn't a joke. I freaked out, and I kind of went on this little rampage about like, wait a minute, they could show up to any mainline Protestant church in the city and see a room full of people who look just like them. Right? And like, why are they coming to, it was almost like, oh, well, this is just so neat. Like, this church is neat. And like, we couldn't, like, they're so creative, And I just thought, you're ruining our thing, man. You are like messing it up. And so and at the same time, we had moved, we got evicted, it's a whole story, we moved, and we're in this like historic...
Did they come with you after the eviction?
No. So we moved, and then that was the first service with all the new people, right?
Oh.
And it was like this stately, historic neighborhood instead of the like grungy, hipster neighborhood we came from. And I turned to this woman who's like my deacon, and I was like, we got to get the hell out of this neighborhood because it's attracting the wrong element. Like, this is... Yeah. And I would call my friends and I'd rant about it and what am I going to do? And I called one of my friends who has a similar type of church in St. Paul, Minnesota called House of Mercy. And I called up Russell and I was like, dude, have you ever had normal people take over your church? And so I go on this, I tell him the whole story, expecting him to be like, man, that sucks. And instead he goes, because our community holds this value of welcoming the stranger. And he goes, yeah, you guys are really good at welcoming the stranger when it's a young transgender kid, but sometimes the stranger looks like your mom and dad. I was like, you're supposed to be my friend. And so I had scheduled this meeting to talk about the demographic change in our community. And in my heart, I thought, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll gather everyone around. And so the people who've been around since the beginning to tell the story about this church and who they are. And so that the people who are new...
Just to be clear, so this to you felt like a bit of a death.
Yes, no,
the
completely.
dream of what the church had been about.
Because I thought, Well, then the people who showed up will find out what the church is about and leave. And then what happened, thank God, is I had that phone call with Russell.
Yeah.
And had this, like, God reaching in and pulling out my heart of stone and replacing it with a heart of flesh, like something that was actually warm and beating again.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the meeting, and I told that story, and the people who were new told us who they were and why they were there, so that the people who've been there from the beginning could hear what the church is about. And then everyone said, went around the circle, and then Asher said, look, as the young transgender kid who was welcomed into this community, I just want to go on record as saying, I'm glad there's people who look like my mom and dad here, because they love me in a way my mom and dad can't. And so, yeah, you're clapping, but like that sucked for me. Because that was I was sure I was right. I was going to fight the fight. I was going to do what needed to be done. And then like my heart gets just cold and stony the longer I go on that path every time. And then you'd think I'd have like a Ziploc installed so that it wasn't such a messy, painful process when God had to reach out and rip it out and replace it with something beating, but it doesn't work like that. So that, to me, that's the Christian life. It's always death and resurrection.
You use this term in your book that I really love, spiritual physics. It's spiritual physics. Something has to die. Go on.
Yeah, something has to die in order for something new to live. It's spiritual physics. Yeah.